What the hell are you doing here? Caleb roared across the ballroom. I told you not to come. 200 guests went silent. I had paid nearly $80,000 for my daughter's wedding. Yet, I was the one being thrown out. I straightened my jacket and smiled. Fine, I'll leave. Then, I looked toward the doors. But first, meet the man who's been searching for you for 2 years. Caleb turned and suddenly, the groom stopped breathing in horror. Emily came through my front door just after 7 on a Tuesday night, still wearing her work clothes and carrying the kind of nervous energy I had seen before difficult conversations. Dad, I have news. She did not sit down. She held out her left hand instead. The ring was impossible to miss. For half a second, all I saw was my little girl at 8 years old, standing on a kitchen chair while Rachel braided her hair before school. Then the present came back. Caleb proposed. Her smile appeared quickly, almost defensively. Last night, I stood and hugged her. Then, congratulations. She hugged me back, but only for a moment. We set a date. I looked at her. Already, June 21st. That's 8 weeks away? I know. She moved toward the living room and finally sat down. We don't want a long engagement. I took the chair across from her. Where are you thinking? The Harbor Grand. That got my attention. The Harbor Grand was one of those waterfront hotels where the view alone seemed to add 20% to every invoice. How many people? About 180. I leaned back. Emily saw my face and rushed ahead. Before you say anything. Caleb knows it's a lot. We both do. But this is my wedding. Dad, I want it to feel special. I haven't said anything. You were about to. That bothered me more than the number. She had arrived prepared to defend herself against an argument I had not started. What does special cost? She looked down at the ring. Probably 78 to 85,000. I let the silence sit between us. Then she added, You told Mom you'd help me when I got married. There it was. Rachel. Not used cruelly. Not intentionally. But the name still landed hard. 3 years after losing my wife, there were promises I could remember word for word. Rachel had wanted Emily to have a beautiful wedding someday. She had also expected me to ask questions. I remember what I promised your mother. Emily's shoulders relaxed. So, you'll help? Yes. Up to 80,000. She exhaled so sharply it was almost a laugh. Thank you. But I want the payments handled directly. Venue. Catering. Vendors. No lump sum. Her expression tightened. Why? Because that's how I handle large expenses. Dad, this isn't one of your construction projects. No. It's your wedding. Which is why I'd rather keep money from becoming a problem between us. She stared at me for a second, then nodded. Fine, I asked. How much is Caleb contributing? Her fingers moved around the ring. He's a little cash tight right now. Cash tight. Northline is scaling. He's putting everything back into the company. I kept my face neutral. That happens. He said once the next funding round closes, things will be completely different. I had spent 38 years around businessmen. Men with real companies usually talked about customers, payroll, margins, contracts. Men with stories talked about funding rounds. Still, I said nothing. Instead, I asked, why don't the three of us have dinner? Emily's eyes brightened with relief. That would actually be great. Caleb wants you to understand him better. I'd like that too. She stood, kissed my cheek, and grabbed her coat. By the time the door closed behind her, I realized something I did not want to admit. My daughter had not come home asking for my blessing. She had come carrying a budget. The house felt larger after Emily left. I stood in the foyer for a while, staring at the closed door, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the old clock in the hallway. Rachel used to complain that silence had weight. I never understood what she meant until she was gone. I carried my coffee into the den and pulled a leather photo album from the bottom shelf. Rachel had organized every year of Emily's childhood with the same precision I used on construction schedules. There she was at 6, missing both front teeth, sitting on my shoulders at Fenway. At 12, holding a crooked science fair ribbon like she'd won the Nobel Prize. At 18, pretending she wasn't crying when we left her at college. Then I found a photograph from her graduation. Rachel stood between us, one arm around Emily and one around me, smiling like she knew exactly where the three of us belonged. I closed my eyes for a second. 3 years without her. And I was still learning which decisions were harder when nobody sat across from me at midnight and said, You're overthinking this. Dan, maybe I was. Caleb had been in Emily's life 8 months, long enough to become important. Not long enough for me to understand him. I tried to list what I actually knew. 35. Founder of Northline Metrics, something involving artificial intelligence and freight logistics, expensive apartment in the seaport, expensive watch, expensive taste in restaurants. He spoke often about investors, valuations, strategic partnerships, and people whose names always seemed important enough that I was supposed to recognize them. But I had never heard him mention a customer. That bothered me. In construction, you could lie about almost anything for a while. Growth, pipeline, opportunity. But eventually somebody had to sign a contract and somebody had to pay an invoice. I opened my laptop. Northline Metrics had a polished website, dark background, clean graphics, phrases like predictive infrastructure intelligence and next-generation freight optimization. I clicked through every page. No client list, no case studies, no office address beyond a mailbox service in Boston. The team page showed Caleb and 2 advisors, neither of whom appeared to work there full-time. None of it proved anything. That mattered. I had spent too many years negotiating deals to confuse suspicion with evidence. Sometimes, a young company really was just a young company. Sometimes, confidence looked like arrogance because the person wearing it was 30 years younger than you. I shut the laptop. My problem wasn't Northline Metrics. My problem was Emily. She had walked into my house ready to fight me before I had challenged her. That kind of defensiveness usually came from somewhere. Maybe Caleb had been telling her I didn't trust her judgment. Maybe I had given her reasons to believe that myself. My phone buzzed. Emily. Dinner Thursday, 7:30, Calder House in Seaport. Caleb made the reservation. Please come with an open mind. I read the last sentence twice. Then I typed back. I will. I returned the album to the shelf and looked once more at Rachel's graduation photo. One fair chance, I said quietly. Caleb deserved that much. For Emily's sake. I wanted more than anything to be wrong about him. And if my instincts were wrong, I'd be glad to apologize. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror Thursday evening, adjusting the knot of my navy tie for the second time. Rachel had bought it for our 25th anniversary. She used to say, it made me look less like a contractor and more like a man who knew how to order wine without pointing at the menu. I almost smiled at the memory. Tonight, I needed that version of myself she had trusted, not the father who was suspicious of every man near his daughter, not the businessman who could reduce a person to numbers in 10 minutes. Just a man meeting the person Emily planned to marry. I fastened my cufflinks, slipped on a charcoal jacket, and checked the time. 6:40. Calder House was about 40 minutes away with traffic, so I had enough margin to arrive without rushing. Before leaving, I stopped in the den and looked at Rachel's photograph on the bookshelf. You'd handle this better, I said. The photograph offered no advice. That was the problem with memory. It could remind you who someone had been, but it could not tell you what to do next. I picked up my keys and headed for the garage. On the drive into Boston, I made rules for myself. Do not interrogate Caleb. Do not bring up the wedding money unless he does. Do not ask about Northline like I am auditing the company. Listen more than I speak. Most importantly, do not make Emily choose sides. That last rule mattered most. I had seen fathers lose grown children because they confused concern with authority. Emily was 29. If I treated her like a teenager, Caleb would not need to push me out. I would do it for him. Traffic thickened near the seaport, brake lights stretching ahead in long red lines. I thought about the first time Emily had brought Caleb to my house. He had arrived with a bottle of wine that cost more than it needed to, and complimented everything from the kitchen renovation to the neighborhood. He was polished, maybe too polished, but polished was not a crime. I reminded myself of that twice. At a red light, my phone buzzed. Emily, please be nice tonight. I stared at the message longer than I should have. Then I replied, always am? 3 dots appeared, vanished, then appeared again. She finally sent a heart. Something about that small exchange tightened my chest. I did not want to be the obstacle in her life. If Caleb loved her, respected her, and planned to build something real with her, I would make room for him. I could even learn to like him. That was the truth. The more difficult truth was that I wanted him to prove my instincts wrong. I parked 2 blocks from the restaurant and sat behind the wheel for a moment. The harbor reflected the last light of evening. Glass towers caught the sunset, all gold and steel. I straightened Rachel's tie one final time. Fair chance, I said aloud. Then I stepped out into the cold wind. By the time I reached Calder House, I had decided exactly who I would be that night. Open-minded, respectful, calm. A man's character appeared in the moments he believed were too small to matter, and observant enough to notice what Caleb did when he thought nobody important was watching. The hostess led me through Calder House toward a private dining room overlooking the harbor. By the time I reached the table, everyone was already seated except Caleb. He stood when he saw me, smiling broadly. "There he is," he announced, "the man keeping this wedding economy alive." A few people laughed because they were not sure whether it was a joke. Emily did not. "Caleb," she said quietly. "What?" He spread his hands. "I'm being grateful." I shook his hand. "Good to see you." "You too." "Dan." His grip was firm, just a little too firm. Around the table sat Caleb's younger sister, Natalie, two men he introduced as business partners, and an older couple named the Harpers, longtime friends of his family. Emily had saved the chair beside her for me. I sat down and told myself to remember my rules. Listen, observe, do not react. For the first 10 minutes, Caleb was charming. He ordered a bottle of Barolo without checking the price, told a funny story about a venture conference in New York, and complimented Emily so smoothly that even I understood why she had fallen for him. Then the conversation turned to work. "So, Dan," one of his partners asked, "Emily says you built commercial properties for years, mostly offices, medical space, and mixed-use developments." Caleb smiled into his wine. "Old school wealth." I looked at him. "What does that mean?" "Nothing bad." He lifted one shoulder. "Concrete, leases, tenants, very 20th century. Natalie stared at her plate. I said, "It paid the bills." "That's the difference between your generation and mine." Caleb leaned back. "You guys were obsessed with profit. We build value first." "Value for whom?" His smile tightened. "For the market." I nodded. "Who are Northline's paying customers right now?" The room changed. Not dramatically, just enough. One of his partners stopped reaching for the bread. Emily glanced at Caleb. He gave a short laugh. "You really do turn everything into an audit." I asked one question. "You wouldn't understand the model yet. We're pre-scale, pre-revenue." Caleb took a drink. "See, that's exactly the kind of limited thinking I mean." Emily touched his arm. "Caleb, Dad is just interested." "No, he's evaluating me." I kept my voice calm. "You're marrying my daughter. I'm trying to know you." "And financing the wedding," he said. "Let's not pretend that doesn't make you feel entitled to a seat at every table." Emily's face reddened. "Stop." Caleb ignored her. "Dan built his life waiting for buildings to appreciate. I'm building something people like him won't understand until it's already worth $100 million. One of the Harpers shifted uncomfortably. Natalie whispered his name, but Caleb only smirked, pleased with himself. He wanted the room to know who held power. I looked around the table. Nobody met my eyes. That told me more than Caleb's speech did. Then he smiled and raised his glass. "To progress." I lifted mine. But I was no longer wondering whether Caleb liked me. I was wondering why one simple question about customers had frightened him so much. By the time our entrees arrived, Caleb had finished most of the Barolo and ordered another bottle without asking anyone else. His humor changed with the second glass. The jokes stopped pretending to be jokes. He interrupted Natalie twice, corrected one of his business partners in front of the table, and snapped at the waiter for bringing the wrong side dish, even though I had heard Caleb order it himself. Emily kept trying to steer the conversation somewhere safer. Wedding music, the harbor view, a cousin flying in from Denver. Caleb kept dragging it back to me. "You know what your problem is, Dan," he said finally. I set down my fork. "I'm sure you're going to tell me. You think paying for things gives you authority." Emily closed her eyes. "Caleb, no. He should hear this." He leaned toward me. "Every question, every little look. It's all the same thing. You're trying to make Emily feel like she still needs your approval. That's not what I'm doing, isn't it?" "No." He laughed softly. "Then why do you keep asking about my company?" "Because you talk about it constantly." One of his partners looked down to hide a smile. Caleb saw it. His face hardened. "You see, this is exactly what I mean. You walk into a room and everyone is supposed to treat you like the adult." "I am an adult." "So am I. I didn't say otherwise." Emily reached for his arm. "Please, just stop." Caleb pulled away from her touch. Then he looked at me with an expression I had seen before, in difficult negotiations. Not anger. Enjoyment. He had finally found the moment he wanted. "Actually, there is one thing we should clear up before next weekend." Emily went still. I said, "What's that?" Caleb took another drink. "You're not coming to the wedding." For a second, I thought I had misheard him. Natalie whispered, "Caleb, don't." Emily turned toward him so quickly her chair scraped the floor. What did you just say? He heard me. You do not get to decide that. It's our wedding. It's my father. And he has spent 2 months undermining us. I looked at Emily. Is this what you want? No. Her answer came immediately. Caleb's hand disappeared beneath the table. Emily flinched. It was small, almost nothing. But I saw his fingers close around her wrist. Not hard enough to leave a bruise in front of witnesses, hard enough to silence her. Something inside me became very quiet. I had spent my career watching men reveal themselves when they believed the room belonged to them. Caleb had just shown me something no polished pitch could hide completely. I pushed my chair back. Caleb smirked, running away. I folded my napkin and placed it beside my plate. Then, I looked only at my daughter. You're my daughter. You will always have a home with me. Her eyes filled. Dad. Please. I wanted to pull her away from that table. Instead, I forced myself to remember that she was 29 years old. I turned to Caleb. Enjoy your dinner. I walked out without raising my voice. Outside, the harbor wind cut through my jacket. Behind me, Caleb probably believed he had won. He was wrong. The wedding was no longer what frightened me. The marriage was. I drove south without deciding to. Boston's lights thinned behind me as I followed the curve toward Castle Island, the harbor black beyond the windshield. By the time I parked near the water, the restaurant was 20 minutes behind me, but Caleb's hand around Emily's wrist was still in front of my eyes. I shut off the engine. For a while, I just sat there. The wind pushed hard against the car, rocking it slightly. Rachel and I used to come here when life got complicated. We would walk until one of us finally said the thing we had been avoiding. Tonight, I had nobody to walk with. My phone buzzed. Emily. I let it ring. A minute later, a voicemail appeared. I pressed play. Dad. I'm sorry. Caleb drank too much. He's under a lot of pressure right now. The wedding, the company, everything. He didn't mean what he said. Please don't make this worse. Just give him some time. I listened twice, not because I needed to hear Caleb's excuses again, because they were coming from my daughter. He drank too much. He was stressed. He didn't mean it. 3 sentences designed to turn a choice into an accident. I stared through the windshield at the dark water. The dinner no longer bothered me because Caleb had insulted me. Men had insulted me before. Competitors, contractors, partners who wanted better terms. You learned quickly that wounded pride was expensive. What bothered me was how easily Emily had started explaining away behavior that should have frightened her. I thought about the customer question. One simple question. Who pays Northline? Caleb had treated it like an attack. Then the wrist. Then the wedding. Then the attempt to make Emily believe I was the threat. That pattern was not random. I got out of the car and walked toward the seawall. Cold air hit my face hard enough to clear the last of the anger. By the time I returned, I had made a decision. I would not accuse Caleb of anything. I would not confront Emily. I would find facts. The next morning, I started with public records. Northline Metrics had been incorporated 18 months earlier. The mailing address was a shared office service. Nothing unusual there, but an older filing connected Caleb to another company. Voss Meridian Labs. Dissolved. I searched the name. A civil complaint appeared in federal court records. Then, another reference under a slightly different company name. Different logo. Different address. Same registered agent. I called a former lender I had worked with years ago. He called someone else. That person called me back near noon. You're asking about Caleb Voss? Yes. Silence. Then his voice changed. I know someone who's been looking for that man for 2 years. I stopped writing. Who? He gave me a name. Marcus Hale. And for the first time since leaving Calder House, I understood that Caleb might not be hiding a weak company. He might be hiding an old life. I wrote the number down slowly. My anger was gone now. What replaced it was colder, steadier, and more dangerous. 11 days later, I stood in the shadows at the back of the Harbor Grand Ballroom while my daughter danced beneath a ceiling of crystal lights. The ceremony had already ended. That part mattered to me. I had arrived after Emily and Caleb exchanged vows because I had made one promise to myself during the investigation: I would not storm into a chapel, stop a ceremony, or turn my daughter's life into a spectacle before I knew exactly what I was dealing with. By then, I knew enough. More than enough. The previous 11 days had been a blur of public records, old corporate filings, civil complaints, and phone calls to people who owed me favors from 38 years in business. Each answer had opened another door. Voss Meridian Labs had not simply failed. It had vanished. So had another company before it. The names changed. The mailing addresses changed. The pitch changed. Caleb did not. And Marcus Hale had remembered everything. He had flown in that morning from New York with copies of the original agreements, bank records, and the signature Caleb had sworn nobody would ever trace again. I stayed near a service corridor where the catering staff moved in and out carrying trays of champagne. From there, I could see the entire room without being immediately noticed. Emily looked beautiful. That was the hardest part. She laughed with one of her bridesmaids, her white dress catching the harbor light, and for several seconds I forgot every document I had read. I just saw my daughter. A part of me wanted to leave. Let her have one perfect night. Let tomorrow carry the truth. Then I saw Caleb near the bar, surrounded by guests, one hand holding champagne, while the other cut through the air as he told some story about investors and expansion. People leaned toward him. He was performing again, confident, untouchable, exactly the man Marcus had described. My phone vibrated. I looked down. Marcus, we're inside. 4 words. My stomach tightened. I glanced toward the main entrance but could not see him yet. Beside Marcus was a licensed process server, carrying the legal papers Caleb had spent 2 years avoiding. This was no ambush built on rumor, no threat, no accusation I could not prove. The law had finally caught up with him. I slipped my phone back into my jacket and stayed where I was. Across the ballroom, Caleb raised his glass while someone toasted the newlyweds. Cheers erupted. Emily smiled. For one final moment, I wondered whether protecting her gave me the right to destroy the illusion she was standing inside. Then Caleb turned. His eyes moved casually across the room, past the tables, past the dance floor, past the flowers I had helped pay for, and stopped on me. The smile disappeared from his face. His champagne glass froze halfway to his mouth. Even from 50 feet away, I watched recognition become disbelief, then rage. He handed the glass to the nearest guest and started pushing through the crowd. I did not move. Behind him, the ballroom doors opened. Marcus Hale had arrived. Caleb reached me before Marcus had crossed half the ballroom. "What the hell are you doing here?" he shouted. The music faltered. Conversations died around us. A dozen phones lifted almost instinctively. "I told you not to come." Emily turned from the dance floor, confusion flashing across her face. I kept my hands at my sides. "You're right," I said. "You did." Caleb glanced around, pleased that everyone was watching. "Then leave." A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Natalie stood near one of the tables, staring at her brother like she no longer recognized him. I nodded once. "Fine. I'll leave." Caleb's mouth curled into a satisfied smile. Then I looked past him toward the ballroom doors. "But first, there's someone I think you should meet." His smile weakened. "I don't care who you brought. I think you will." Emily stepped closer. "Dad, what's going on?" I didn't answer her. My eyes stayed on Caleb. The doors opened wider. Marcus Hale entered in a charcoal suit, calm and deliberate, with another man walking beside him carrying a leather document folder. Caleb turned. For the first time since I had met him, there was no arrogance in his face, only recognition and fear. Marcus stopped several feet away. "Hello?" "Caleb." Caleb's lips parted, but nothing came out. The man beside Marcus opened the folder. I watched Caleb's confidence disappear in real time. Then Marcus said the sentence that changed my daughter's wedding forever. "We've been trying to serve you for 2 years, and now, there was nowhere left to run." Marcus stopped 3 feet from Caleb. "You disappeared before we finished our last conversation," he said. Caleb's face had gone pale enough that the ballroom lights couldn't hide it. "This is insane," he muttered. "You can't just walk into my wedding." The man beside Marcus stepped forward and opened the leather folder. "Caleb Voss." Caleb looked at him, then at Marcus. "Who are you?" "Licensed process server." The room seemed to shrink around us. He removed a thick packet. "You are being served in a civil action filed by Hale Ridge Capital regarding fraudulent inducement, forged financial statements, falsified customer contracts, and misappropriation of investor funds totaling $1,650,000. Nobody moved. The papers remained suspended until Caleb finally took them. His fingers shook. "No," he said. "This is old. This was settled." Marcus gave a humorless smile. "Nothing was settled? You vanished." A whisper moved through the guests. Caleb flipped through the pages too quickly to read them. "This is a misunderstanding." Marcus's voice stayed calm. "You submitted revenue statements for customers that never existed. You forged 2 signatures. You moved investor money through shell companies and disappeared 3 days before our auditors arrived." Emily stepped beside me. "Caleb," He didn't look at her. That frightened me more than any denial could have. Marcus reached into his briefcase and removed a photocopy. I kept this. He held up a page bearing Caleb's signature. Caleb stepped backward. His champagne glass slipped from his hand and shattered against the floor. For the first time since I'd met him, he had no speech ready, no joke, no accusation, no polished explanation, just fear. Emily's voice came out almost inaudible. Tell me he's lying. Caleb stared at the broken glass, terrified. Marcus closed his briefcase. He can't. And in that silence, I watched my daughter realize she had not married a struggling entrepreneur. She had married a man who had been running from his own name. Caleb finally looked at Emily. Baby, listen to me. Hale is angry because a deal went bad. Marcus didn't move. A deal didn't go bad, he said. You lied to get the money. Caleb's eyes flashed. You don't know what you're talking about. I signed the wire. The guests had stopped pretending not to listen. The ballroom was silent except for the faint scrape of shoes and the soft hiss of the harbor air through an open terrace door. Emily stepped closer to Caleb. Did you take his money? No. Marcus opened his briefcase again. Caleb's answer changed immediately. Not like he's making it sound. Emily stared at him. That was the first crack. Not the lawsuit. Not the shattered champagne glass. The change in his answer. I saw it land. What does that mean? She asked. Caleb lowered his voice. There were accounting issues. We were moving fast. People signed things they didn't fully understand. Marcus pulled out a second document. This is a customer contract for Beacon Freight Systems. That company never hired you. Caleb said nothing. This signature belongs to a man who testified he never met you. Another page. And this revenue statement showed $4.2 million in annual sales when your company had less than 80,000. Emily's face changed with every sentence. I could almost see the last 8 months replaying behind her eyes. The apartment, the restaurants, the watch, the trips, the ring on her finger. She looked down at it, then at Caleb. How much of our life was paid for with stolen money? Emily, stop. No. Her voice sharpened. How much? Caleb glanced toward the crowd. Can we not do this here? You chose here. The words hit harder than anything I could have said. He reached for her arm. She stepped back. That mattered. Marcus placed one final document on the table beside them. Your husband also used a shell company called Eastbridge Holdings to move investor funds into personal accounts. Emily looked at me. You knew. I suspected something was wrong. For how long? Not long enough to accuse him. Long enough to make sure I wasn't wrong. Her eyes filled. You could have told me. I tried to tell you I was worried. No. You could have told me this. I didn't have this until 3 days ago. Caleb seized on the opening. See. He planned this. He wanted to humiliate me. I turned toward him. This stopped being about you humiliating me the moment I saw your hand around my daughter's wrist. Emily froze. Caleb's face hardened. Then Emily asked the question that emptied whatever was left of the room. Was I your wife, Caleb? He stared at her. Or was I your next clean name? His silence answered first. Emily removed her ring. Her hand was shaking, but her voice was not. She set it beside the legal papers. Around us. Phones lowered. Nobody whispered anymore. Even the string quartet stood motionless, bows hanging at their sides as if music itself had become inappropriate. I wanted to tell her I was sorry. I wanted to take her home, close the door, and erase the last 20 minutes. Instead, I said the only thing that felt honest. I'm sorry you had to learn it here. She looked at me through tears, then back at the man she had married. And for the first time, she wasn't looking at Caleb with love. She was looking at him like evidence. I drove home alone. By the time I pulled into Newton, the adrenaline had burned off, leaving only exhaustion. Inside, I went straight upstairs and loosened Rachel's navy tie. For a moment, I stood in front of the mirror holding it in both hands. She had always believed consequences mattered more when they were clean. No cruelty, no theatrics, no excuses. I folded the tie carefully and placed it back in the drawer. Then, I went downstairs to my office. The wedding folder was exactly where I had left it. Contracts, payment schedules, vendor invoices, confirmation emails. I opened everything. If I was going to draw a line, I wanted to know precisely where it belonged. The Harbor Grand Ballroom deposit had already cleared. So had the florist, the ceremony musicians, and the original photography package. Those agreements carried my signature. I paid them. No argument. No punishment. People had done their jobs. I wasn't going to make innocent vendors absorb the cost of Caleb's fraud. Then, I reached the later invoices. Premium, open bar upgrade, after-party suite, luxury SUV service, additional photography hours, a custom cigar station Caleb had added 2 weeks earlier. None of those agreements carried my name. They carried his. I called Margaret at my bank. Dan, it's late. Everything okay? No, I said. But I need to cancel 3 scheduled transfers that haven't cleared. She pulled up the account. Total is $26,400. That's right. Fraud issue, not on my account. I'm withdrawing voluntary funding for expenses I never approved. A pause. Understood. One by one. The pending transfers disappeared. Next, I emailed every vendor connected to the remaining charges. I kept the message simple. I would honor every contract I had personally signed. I would not cover additions authorized by Caleb Voss. Any unpaid balance tied to his agreements should be billed directly to him. No threats, no accusations, just boundaries. My phone began vibrating before I finished the 4th email. Emily. I watched her name appear, disappear, then return. I didn't answer. Not yet. I loved my daughter enough to help her. I also loved her enough not to confuse help with rescuing her from consequences. I printed the final payment confirmations and placed them in a new folder. For years, I had protected Emily from consequences before she even knew they existed. College emergencies, bad leases, car repairs, mistakes I could solve with one phone call or one check. That instinct was still there. But this was different. If I paid everything now, Caleb's collapse would become another problem I quietly cleaned up, and Emily would learn the wrong lesson. At 11:18, I closed the folder. I had paid every dollar I owed, and not $1 more. The first call came before I had finished brushing my teeth. Emily. I watched her name glow on the bathroom counter until the screen went dark. 30 seconds later, it rang again. By the time I reached the kitchen, I had 7 missed calls and 3 voicemails. The first was angry. Dad, you can't just disappear after blowing up my wedding. The second sounded frightened. Caleb says Marcus is twisting everything. I don't know what's true anymore. The third was barely above a whisper. Please call me. That one hurt. I poured coffee and stood at the window. Every instinct I had as a father told me to get in the car. Bring Emily home, hire her an attorney, pay every bill, and make the mess disappear. I had done versions of that her whole life. Flat tire at 19, I handled it. Bad apartment lease after college, I found the lawyer. Unexpected medical deductible, I sent the money. It had always felt like love. Maybe sometimes it had been fear. Fear that if Emily struggled, I had failed her. My phone rang again. Call 12. Then 13. By noon, 21. I listened to 2 more voicemails. Vendors were contacting her. Caleb had vanished from the hotel before sunrise. His attorney was telling him not to speak. Emily didn't know whether to stay in their apartment or leave. That was when I finally picked up the phone. Not to call her, to send one message. You are safe. My door is open, but I will not finance his consequences. I stared at the words before pressing send. 3 minutes later, she called again. I let it ring. The rest of the day became a test of my resolve. 28 calls, 33, 39. At 8:17 that evening, call 44 lit the screen. I sat in Rachel's chair with the television muted and my phone in my hand. For a moment, my thumb hovered over accept. Then I set it face down. I wasn't abandoning my daughter. If Emily came to my door, I would open it. If she was unsafe, I would be there before she finished the sentence. But I would not erase every consequence before she had time to understand it. Caleb had spent months teaching her that independence meant rejecting anyone who questioned him. Now she had to discover what independence actually meant. Not being alone, not refusing help, choosing what was true, then standing on your own feet. The phone stopped ringing. The silence felt terrible, but for the first time in years, I did not rush in to rescue her from it. 3 weeks after the wedding, Detective Mara Collins called me from the Massachusetts Attorney General's office. Mr. Whitmore, your information helped connect several complaints we couldn't previously link. How many? 12 confirmed so far, possibly more. Caleb had not simply taken money from Marcus. Investigators found 2 dissolved companies, 4 shell accounts, forged vendor contracts, and a pattern of investors who had been promised impossible returns before Caleb disappeared behind another business name. He was formally charged with multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and theft. Emily did not attend the arraignment. I did not blame her. By then, she had moved out of the Seaport apartment and hired an attorney to begin untangling the marriage. Caleb's name had become something she avoided saying. 7 months later, I sat beside Marcus in a Boston courtroom while Caleb stood before the judge. He looked smaller. No tailored tuxedo, no expensive watch, no audience waiting to laugh at his jokes. His attorney had negotiated a plea agreement after prosecutors documented 14 victims and losses, exceeding $2 million. The judge sentenced him to 30 months in prison and ordered restitution. Caleb stared straight ahead. For once, Charm had nowhere to go. Outside the courthouse, Marcus extended his hand. "You brought the first thread," he said. "Without you, we might still be looking." I shook it. "You don't owe me thanks." "I think I do." I looked back at the courthouse doors. No. He just finally ran out of people willing to believe him. Marcus nodded and walked toward the street. I stayed on the steps for another moment. I had imagined justice would feel satisfying. It didn't. It felt quiet. Caleb was finished. But winning against him had never been the part that mattered most. The only question left was whether Emily and I could find our way back to each other again someday. Emily came home Sunday evening carrying wine and no makeup. She looked older than she had 8 months earlier, but steadier too. We ate at the kitchen table where Rachel used to insist serious conversations belonged. Halfway through dinner, Emily set down her fork. "I finally understand what you were trying to do." I shook my head. "I wasn't trying to win." "I know." She looked toward Rachel's empty chair. "You saved me from becoming another name on that list." "You walked out," I said. "I just made sure the door was visible." Her eyes filled, but she smiled. She had moved into a smaller apartment, returned to work, started counseling, and taken responsibility for the legal mess Caleb left behind. For the first time in years, she was building a life nobody else was financing. "I'm going to repay the wedding money," she said. "No, Dad." "Then, repay it differently." She waited. "Never hand your judgment to another person again. Not to a husband. Not even to me." That made her laugh through the tears. After dinner, I made Rachel's apple crisp. Emily took one bite and said I still used too much cinnamon. Some things had survived. As she hugged me goodbye, I remembered something Rachel once told me. Make sure they always have a road home. Emily had found hers. If this story moved you, like the video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what you would have done.